8 out of 10 American millionaires drive a used car. Sit with that for a second. Not a Tesla they leased last month and posted about. Not a car with a bow on it from a holiday commercial. A used car. Bought second-hand, driven for years, probably with a small dent in the bumper nobody's ever bothered to fix because fixing it was never the point. Meanwhile, the guy who financed a brand new BMW on a 5-year loan last spring, the one with the temporary paper plates you still see circling the same parking lot at work every morning, statistically, he's got a decent chance of being broke. Not tight on cash this month broke. Actually broke. Negative net worth broke. Once you subtract what he owes from what he owns, we have the entire equation backwards. From the time we're kids, we're trained to spot wealth by what we can see. A house, a car, a watch, a vacation. And the truth, the uncomfortable truth that nobody tells you, is that the things you can see are almost never the wealth itself. Most of the time, what you're looking at is the debt, dressed up to look like success. Think about the last time you looked at somebody and thought, that person's doing well. What actually triggered that thought? Go back and really look at it. It was the car in the driveway. It was the watch on the wrist. It was the vacation photos, the handbag, the neighborhood they live in. We size people up in about 4 seconds flat, based entirely on packaging. And packaging happens to be the single cheapest, easiest thing in the entire world to fake. You can finance every visible marker of wealth on a payment plan. Every single one of them. You've done this. I've done this. We all do it, constantly, almost involuntarily. We walk away from that 4-second scan with a confident conclusion about someone's financial life, and more often than most of us would like to admit, that conclusion is completely wrong. And here's the part that stings a little. If you're doing this to other people every single day without realizing it, there's a very good chance you're doing the exact same thing to yourself, measuring your own progress against the same fake, visible signals, instead of the real, invisible ones that actually determine how your life turns out. Because there is a very specific kind of wealthy person who will never once show up on your radar, not because they're secretive, not because they're hiding anything from you on purpose, simply because you have spent your entire life being trained to look for the wrong evidence in the wrong places, using the wrong instrument. Let me tell you about 2 guys I used to work with. I'll call them Robert and Tyler. Tyler had the corner cubicle with the best view in the building. Tyler drove a new Audi every 2 or 3 years, always leased, always spotless, always smelling faintly of that new car air freshener he'd reapplied before anyone got in. Tyler wore a nice watch, name brand everything, head to toe. He took one big, flashy vacation every year and documented every single second of it. The infinity pool, the sunset, the little umbrella in the drink. If you had walked around that office and asked 20 people who was winning financially, 19 of them would have said Tyler without even pausing to think about it. Robert drove a 12-year-old Honda Accord with a long crack running diagonally across the windshield that he genuinely never got around to fixing. Robert brought the same turkey sandwich lunch every single day, packed in a lunchbox that looked like it had personally survived 3 separate presidential administrations. Robert wore the same 3 button-down shirts on a slow, predictable weekly rotation, and everybody in the office had quietly noticed and quietly said nothing. If you'd asked those same 20 people about Robert, most of them wouldn't have had much of an opinion at all. He was, financially speaking, invisible. He simply didn't register on anybody's radar as a person worth thinking about in terms of money, one way or the other. Here is what none of us knew, for over a decade of working alongside him. When Robert passed away suddenly, a heart thing, fast, far too young, his family sat down to sort through his affairs and discovered a portfolio worth just north of $2.3 million. A fully paid-off house, retirement accounts funded to the max, year after year, without fail. A modest but very real cushion set aside for both of his kids to go to college without loans. Tyler, meanwhile, was still making lease payments on his 4th Audi in that same stretch of years. When the company went through a round of layoffs and Tyler's name ended up on the list, he lasted about 4 months on savings before he had to move back in with his parents at 38 years old. Audi long since returned, watch quietly sold. Same office, same rough salary bracket for most of that decade. Wildly, dramatically different outcomes. And every single person in that building had the story exactly backwards the entire time it was unfolding right in front of us. So today I want to walk you through 13 signs that someone, maybe someone you already know, maybe, uncomfortably, you yourself, is quietly, invisibly wealthy. Not flashy, not Instagram visible. Actually, boringly, durably rich, in a way that never once needs an audience to be real. Sign number 1, their car is older than their marriage. Robert's Accord had 190,000 miles on it, and it wasn't sitting in that parking lot because he couldn't afford anything better. It was sitting there because a paid-off, reliable car is quietly one of the single most effective wealth-building tools available to an ordinary working person, and almost nobody actually uses it that way. A new car loses roughly 20% of its value the second it's driven off the lot, and keeps bleeding value every year after that, whether you're looking at it or not. Someone who keeps a car for 12 or 15 years and routes that monthly payment into an index fund instead isn't being cheap or stubborn. They're running one of the most reliable wealth-building strategies that exists in personal finance, and from the outside, it looks like absolutely nothing at all, just an old car with a crack in the windshield. Sign number 2, you've never once heard them complain about money, and you've also never seen them spend big. This one is subtle, and it took me years to notice the pattern. The flashy broke person tends to complain about money constantly, almost as a running theme in every conversation, while simultaneously buying expensive things. It becomes such a familiar contradiction that we stop registering it as strange. The invisible rich person, by contrast, almost never brings money up in either direction. No complaining about being tight. No bragging about a big purchase. Genuine financial security tends to make people quieter about money, not louder, because there's no anxiety underneath it demanding to be voiced and no need to signal status to anyone. If someone genuinely never talks about money and never seems visibly stressed by it, that silence itself is often the loudest signal in the room. Sign number 3. Their house is smaller than their income would suggest. There's a well-documented pattern in wealth research. A large share of actual American millionaires live in homes valued well under $1 million, often in the exact same modest neighborhood they bought into decades earlier, long before it became fashionable or expensive. They didn't upgrade their square footage every single time their income went up a notch. The invisible rich tend to buy a home they could comfortably afford on one income alone, even when two incomes are actually coming in, and then let that widening gap compound quietly in the background instead of expanding outward into a bigger kitchen, a bigger yard, a bigger mortgage. Sign number 4, they still ask how much before they order. You'll catch it at a restaurant if you're paying attention. Someone's eyes flick to the price column before they decide what to order, even though you know for an absolute fact that they could afford literally anything on that menu without blinking. This isn't stinginess, and it isn't anxiety either. It's a habit built over years and years of intentional, deliberate decision-making that simply never got switched off the moment the bank balance grew large enough that it technically didn't matter anymore. The habit of quietly asking, "Is this actually worth it?" doesn't disappear once the money shows up. Usually, it's the exact same habit that built the money in the first place, and it just keeps running in the background forever. Sign number 5, they max out retirement accounts before they upgrade their lifestyle. This is one of the clearest tells there is, if you're ever lucky enough to get an honest look at someone's actual finances. Before the nicer car, before the renovated kitchen, before the fancier vacation, the invisible rich person has already contributed the maximum allowed to their 401k and their IRA, often auto-escalating that contribution rate every single year their salary ticks upward, quietly, automatically, before they've even had the chance to feel the extra money show up in a checking account and think about spending it on something visible. It's invisible precisely because it happens inside a retirement account statement that nobody else on earth will ever see, not in a driveway where the whole neighborhood can watch. Sign number 6, their clothes are simple, well-made, and repeated constantly. Robert's 3 shirts weren't cheap department store shirts, they were simply old, well cared for, and worn on a steady rotation that made them look, to a casual outside observer, like the wardrobe of someone who couldn't afford much variety. In reality, buying fewer, better-made things and wearing them faithfully for a full decade is a wealth signature that shows up again and again in research on genuinely high-net-worth individuals. The flashy version of wealth is constant, visible newness. A fresh outfit, a fresh logo, a fresh drop every season. The quiet version is the exact same reliable navy sweater, worn for 8 winters running, because it still fits and it's still warm and there was never any real reason to replace it. Sign number 7, they know their net worth off the top of their head. Ask most people what they're actually worth financially and you'll get a shrug, or a rough guess that's off by tens of thousands of dollars in either direction. Ask an invisible rich person the same question, and there's usually a real number sitting right there in their memory, updated recently, precise to within a few $1,000s. Not because they're obsessed with money or checking it hourly, but because they treat their own financial life the way a well-run small business treats its books, reviewed on a schedule, tracked deliberately, genuinely known rather than vaguely estimated. Nobody around them ever sees this happening. It happens alone, in a spreadsheet, on some unremarkable Tuesday night after everyone else has gone to bed. Sign number 8, their kids don't know how much money the family has. This is the one that tends to surprise people most when I bring it up. Wealthy but invisible parents are frequently, deliberately vague with their own children about the actual size of the family's financial cushion, specifically so the kids don't grow up with a warped, inflated sense of what's normal, or lose the internal drive to build something of their own. The flashy version of wealth broadcasts itself loudly to absolutely everyone, including the next generation growing up inside it, in ways that can quietly do real long-term damage to that kid's work ethic and expectations. The invisible version protects the next generation from that exact damage, on purpose, by design, even if it means the kids grow up assuming the family is far more ordinary than it actually is. Sign number 9, they negotiate everything, even when the amount is genuinely small. You'll catch it in strange, almost embarrassing little moments. Someone negotiating a $40 fee down, calling customer service to quietly ask for a better rate on a bill, questioning a small line item charge that seems slightly off. From the outside, it looks like someone who's genuinely tight on cash and counting every dollar out of necessity. It's almost always the exact opposite. A deeply ingrained habit of simply never leaving money sitting on the table, applied with total consistency at every size of transaction, which is precisely why there's more money sitting there in the first place to leave on the table if they wanted to, which they never do. Sign number 10, they have one nice thing, not many nice things. Instead of 10 mediocre, forgettable possessions scattered around their life, the invisible rich person often has exactly one genuinely excellent thing. One great watch, one great leather chair, one great winter coat, bought outright in full, kept and maintained for decades, while everything else around it stays deliberately, almost aggressively ordinary. It's a strange pattern to notice because it means somebody can look completely unremarkable 95% of the time and be quietly wearing a $5,000 watch the other 5% of the time, and you would genuinely never clock the difference, because nothing else about them is telegraphing status the way our brains have been trained to expect. Sign number 11. Their emergency fund could survive a full year, not a full month. Most people, even people who appear outwardly comfortable and put together, are 1 or 2 missed paychecks away from serious, scrambling trouble. The invisible rich have typically built a cushion capable of carrying them, with zero income coming in at all, for 6 months to a full year without touching a single investment or asking anyone for help. You will never, ever see this from the outside. There's no visible marker of a fully funded emergency fund anywhere in someone's day-to-day life. It just sits there, quietly, doing arguably the single most important job in their entire financial existence, completely unseen and completely unappreciated by anyone watching from the outside. Sign number 12. They talk about enough more than they talk about more. Listen closely to how someone actually frames their financial goals out loud. The flashy broke mindset is almost always chasing the next tier upward, the next car, the next zip code, the next visible status marker. Endlessly, with no real finish line in sight, because the goal was never a number, it was a feeling that always moves just out of reach. The invisible rich person, more often than not, has a clearly defined sense of what enough actually looks like for their specific life, and once they've genuinely hit that number, the entire intensity of their financial behavior shifts from aggressive acquisition to quiet preservation and actual enjoyment. That shift in language, from constantly chasing more to comfortably naming enough, is one of the clearest tells that exists, and it's completely invisible unless you're actually paying close attention to what somebody says, rather than what they happen to own. Sign number 13, the people around them have no idea, until something forces the truth out. This final sign is really the thread that ties every other one together. Robert's own co-workers, myself included, found out the full truth of his financial life only after he had already passed away. Family members of quietly wealthy people are very often stunned during a will reading, or a sudden tuition payment quietly handled without fanfare, or a medical crisis absorbed without a single visible ripple of financial panic. The invisible rich simply don't reveal the real number until life circumstances force it out into the open on their own timeline, and by the time it finally does come out, everyone standing around realizes, usually all at once, that they had been looking directly past it for years without ever seeing it. The month after Robert passed, a handful of us from the old office ran into each other again, standing around awkwardly at the funeral. Somebody mentioned, almost as a passing aside, the number his family had discovered while going through his accounts. Nobody said anything for a long, uncomfortable moment. Then someone finally said, quietly, almost to themselves, "I genuinely thought he was just getting by." That sentence is the one I still can't shake, years later. We all thought he was just getting by. 12 years, an entire office full of reasonably observant adults, and not one of us ever clocked it, because every single one of us was reading the wrong signals the whole time, without ever questioning whether they were the right signals to begin with. Tyler's Audi told us a story about his life that was completely, entirely false. Robert's cracked windshield told us a story too, also completely false, just pointed in the opposite direction. Neither car, it turns out, ever told anyone anything real about either man's actual financial life. The car was never the data. It only ever felt like the data, because a car happens to be the only kind of evidence most of us have ever really been trained to read at a glance. I'm not telling you to go buy a beat-up old car and stop enjoying nice things as some kind of secret status flex, because that would just be a different, more annoying version of the exact same game. Plenty of genuinely wealthy people do spend beautifully and visibly on things they love, and that's completely fine too. Visible spending, on its own, isn't automatically a red flag or proof of anything. What I am telling you is to stop using visible spending as your primary measuring stick. Whether you're sizing up somebody else's life or quietly, privately sizing up your own. If your entire internal sense of how you're doing financially comes from comparing your driveway to someone else's driveway, you're measuring your one and only life with a ruler that was broken before you ever picked it up. The thing about the 13 signs I just walked you through is that almost none of them are visible from across a parking lot, or a dinner table, or a family gathering. You can't see someone's actual 401k contribution rate from where you're standing. You can't see their real net worth statement, their quietly negotiated cable bill, their one good watch bought once and kept faithfully for 30 years, their year-long emergency fund sitting patiently in a high-yield account, earning interest that nobody around them will ever clap for or even know exists. Real financial strength, more often than not, doesn't look like anything at all from the outside. It doesn't announce itself at a dinner party. It doesn't need to, because it was never built to perform for an audience in the first place. It was built, slowly and deliberately, for a future that the person building it may never even get to fully see or brag about to anyone. So the next time you catch yourself sizing someone up by their car, their clothes, their curated vacation photos, or, just as importantly, the next time you catch yourself sizing up your own life against somebody else's carefully edited highlight reel, remember Robert's cracked windshield sitting quietly in that office parking lot for 12 straight years. Remember that the quietest, most invisible person in the room is very often the one who already won the entire game, while everyone else around them was still loudly, expensively trying to convince a room full of strangers that they were even playing it at all.